so evident sometimes that has to do with decadent and obsolete, degraded industrial buildings or old infrastructures of the city. Or it has to do with kind of built areas, built environments that are being transformed constantly, because the city is always building over each other. So it's constantly, we are recycling the city constantly. So what we have to do is how to analyze the existing conditions and how to operate into this context. Or how do we do with a kind of modern city from the 60s, from the 50s in Europe? This is Rotterdam, you know, Silvia Lupini before the famous plaza that came here afterwards. So there's also kind of a collection of heritage buildings that come from the 50s, from the 60s, that today they have also kind of an importance. There's a kind of intuition of it has also certain value. Sometimes it's more acknowledged and you can have it in catalogs on because it's of good architects and famous architects, but sometimes it's not totally protected architecture, but it has like the potential to get improved by creating a better environment around them. So these are all kind of conditions and buildings that you will see in the projects I will show you afterwards. How do we operate and how can we create when all these buildings become empty, degraded, without its original function? How can we transform them and how can we reintegrate them into a new city? Because in the end, it's all about layers of history dealing with between each other. No, you know, this conceptual drawing by Colin Rowe in his Collage City book, right? When he explained the idea of the city of a kind of palimpsest, of overlapping of different layers of the different times, and now we have to add our own layer to our time. So I wanted only to speak about 3 projects rather than talking about many that have that address this question and that they deal with existing urban ensembles that they were originally enclosed, kind of like a fortress, and that when they get absorbed by the growth of the city, we need to reconnect them into the city. And so these 3 projects, they are kind of similar, but you will see that the solutions that we provided in each of them is quite different. And it's also interesting because in a way it marks very much my own professional experience, because it has been dealing from a long time. So this first one is very much for a very long time, but this is a European competition that we got the first prize like 15 years ago in Hungary, in a city called Győr, next to the Danube. And it was the site of this competition. It was located in a former factory for cookies, for very important cookies in Győr, cookies called Győri Kets. And the site of the competition, actually, it was just at that time, 15 years ago, sometimes it was not like so evident about how to deal with heritage. And actually the brief, it was really just trying to make like a new residential development in the area without taking too much consideration on the site, because it was a factory, it was not very nice, it was kind of ugly, so it was not really like a masterpiece in industrial heritage. But we raised the question about if we could actually get a balance between extending all this green neighborhood that was surrounding it, and at the same time keeping part of the existing buildings which they were not beautiful, but they were quite interesting because each building was giving us some kind of new values to the potential new development. So with this question, we thought that we could keep like these buildings isolated, floating, like in a kind of a new landscape. Although this landscape this time, it was not going to be just like a forest or grass or a green, but it was to be just a landscape, like a carpet of small residential houses that would surround completely these existing buildings, these factories, and that would create like a kind of sea of houses. So we called it like a urban magma. And the funny thing is that these buildings, the approach to them, it was that they would not be any more like buildings, but actually they would work as empty spaces, like voids in the fabric. So actually, you could imagine that this would be like kind of a linear plaza, more like Piazza Navona, or this could be like squares in this very dense neighborhood. So the buildings themselves, they would be empty, totally empty, as if they would be covered public space. So to create this kind of idea, we went through a kind of analysis of the existing constructions, and we selected the ones that had some value, because one of them had really big open space, big spans. Others had these bridge connectors. Others had kind of these romantic chimneys as a tradition of the past. So we selected these buildings that we would keep, and I said we were just assuming that they would be totally empty in the inside, as if it was like free space, as if it was a covered plaza, and that we would squat these empty voids to create to have kind of public facilities that would be as public space, but just covered. So we introduce kind of squatting activities, very simple facilities to create outdoor spaces inside the former buildings. And at the same time, we would do some kind of operations in the facade, in the envelope of the building, like Mata Clark art actions, to create kind of connections between the different buildings. So we would start like cutting out pieces of the floors, of the roofs, to interconnect the different buildings between each other. And then the next operation, it was just to flood, as I said, the rest of the site with these different typologies of housing, going from the low-rise house to a kind of four-story houses block, and also from a kind of towers. Also, in order to establish a connection in scale, so that we would go from the small scale of the houses, of the small houses, towards the big size of the factory. So we would add these kind of different residential typologies and create this sea of houses that would conquer the space. The next intervention was, once that we flooded everything with this sea of houses, we would start cutting it to create green corridors that would connect with the city, with the rest of the city, with the existing parks, with the university, and with the university here, and also with the historical city center. So we would start creating streets just by cutting this existing fabric. So in the end, this is how we created this master plan, as a kind of combination, a very strong contrast between residential fabric and the existing buildings that would be plazas, cut out streets, crossing through the buildings, totally disappearing. And and to try to solve this constant question that architecture has, dealing about low rise and high occupation of land, and with high rise and low occupation of land. So the proposal tries to combine both worlds. So the idea of having small residential units with patios, courtyards, and very dense urban fabric, and with towers that would be connected at different levels with these public spaces. So what these existing fabric buildings, the factory buildings, they would become plazas, but at different levels, because at different stories they would be connecting with existing with new buildings. So in the end, the idea was to try to take all the elements of a city, so to go from the high-rise buildings to the small residential villas, and to combine it into a new kind of very dense residential development with a strategy made out of from a landscape point of view, rather than from a urban planning point of view. This was actually 15 years ago, in 2009, almost like a first attempt to work on urban design from a landscape perspective, and we got this first prize in the European competition. And then afterwards, in 2017, we won another competition, the first prize for the master plan for the regeneration of the area of the former Central Hospital in Asturias, to transform it into a mixed-use district. Together with this, was done together with my colleagues Alexandra Delgado and Daniel Cortizo. And the project is located in Oviedo, in the north part of Spain, and it's an area of 23 hectares, where it used to be located the hospital area of the city. 6 or 7 years ago, the hospital was relocated to the west part of the city, to the east part of the city, to all this new complex, and the former area became empty and degraded for many years. After many years of being abandoned, it was raised a kind of international competition to provide a new second life, or how to transform all this area into a new development in the city. So historically, you can see that this was a kind of combination of many different buildings from different times, belonging to a hospital. Usually a hospital is always a kind of a mess. They start with one part, they start with one building, then they build the second one, then they build the third one, then they make an extension to this one. So usually these kind of areas are always built in the maybe 20 years span of time. And you can see that that there's totally no original master plan idea. They just started building, and in the end you have like kind of this very chaotic collection of buildings. At the same time, there was even it was more complex, because it was next to this bullfighting arena that is protected as a really heritage building, which is already abandoned. And also there was this police headquarters of the city. So this was the whole site. That the idea was how to transform this and what to do with it, what to do with all these existing buildings, what should be kept, what should be taken out, what had value, what did not. So here you see, this is all the typical traditional buildings made from the 60s, from the 70s in Spain, even from the 50s. These early modernism in Spain, that had totally changed the original landscape of the area that was kind of a pasture landscape of grass and meadows. And now it was a combination of very strange combination of very different buildings. But actually some of them were built by very important architects from the city, from Asturias, like these pavilions, all with research and for health technology. Or you have this kind of Y-shaped, like a UNESCO UN building in Paris. So the project was really about how to deal with this and to provide a new urban layout. So it was really about urban design. But again, the approach, it was not really about the urban design tools only, but about a landscape perspective. So this is kind of a white, if you only keep the existing buildings, you see that really there's totally a big anarchy and of constructions. And it was kind of complex because some of the buildings were still in function, some of them, like these ones. But then there were also all the buildings that had this kind of value as a heritage, as I said, as the bullfighting arena. This is a very old picture from it, from the 70s. But then there were some kind of buildings that really had a beautiful modernist buildings, like the Instituto Nacional de Silicosis. These other buildings that maybe they were not beautiful, but they were very functional and they were in good shape to be kept. Or, as I said, this kind of Y-shaped building in this location, or this circles building. So the first thing that we did, and also in collaboration with the local authorities and the participation of the neighborhoods, actually there was a very big participation process in order what to do with some of these buildings and which buildings were valuable to be kept. So in the end, we got like kind of a list of the buildings that were worth keeping because of their architectural values, also because their floor plan were valid to adapt it to other uses. Some others were not because they were very specific for health medical programs, or because it was too expensive to renovate them and it was easier to demolish them. So in the end, we got like this kind of combination of buildings that were valuable architectural from an architectural point of view, and economically sustainable, and that structurally they would not need like more interventions. But at the same time, there were some kind of heritage, artistic heritage importance, like a chapel, a small chapel in the site, pieces of art in the walls of some of the buildings, and sculptural pieces. And then there was the third part of the heritage, it had to do with nature. So we identified all the pieces of landscape that had a environmental value, like pieces of pine trees, like small groups of pine tree forest. So we define all these layers as you can see here, this is the piece of forest that was existing before the construction of the hospital. So actually here you can see this is part of the origin of the hospital. These were the first buildings that were built on site, and you can see how it was the original landscape before the city expanded and absorbed all this and completely changed the original landscape. So it was a landscape of soft hills, meadows, agriculture, grass for cows, for pasture. This is a historical picture, and this for us, trying to research on what was the original condition of the site, it was very important in order to give us the tips or the ideas for the strategy about how to work onto this location. also because pasture and this kind of countryside, rural countryside, it's something kind of unique nowadays, and in particularly in Asturias, it also it's very much integrated into the culture, into the popular, into the traditions of the people, and into the kind of vernacular parties and all the so this kind of idea of rural landscape, countryside landscape in the city, what's very appealing, and one of the aims that we had about how to really bring this countryside atmosphere into the city. So for this, we provided this vision that first we would need to create like a new identity for the place, and to give like a new focus, like a new heart. And this heart, it had not to do with architecture, but it had to do with creating a new green heart, a new green landscape. So the first approach, or let's say the design itself, it's very much organized about creating a kind of big central area that it's very much related to all these images of nature, kind of bucolic nature that we saw previously, and that absorbs most of the buildings that are considered like a heritage today, so that they are kind of isolated in the grass. And in a way, we are uplifting the quality of all these buildings. And this green, central green, we would extend it towards the northwest, northeast, in order to connect with the existing boulevard and the city. So this was the first main element of the design. So we did not design urban design by making blocks and streets and buildings, but we would first define what is the main public space, or the main green area that would structure the whole development. And then we would just make a new development around it, like surrounding it and creating new buildings that would show its main facade towards this park. And into this green area, we will have, like, floating into the green, all these, most of these historical buildings that would be now standing like beautiful objects. So something like we were seeing before in Rome Forum, that suddenly the perception of these buildings changes immediately when they are totally surrounded by other buildings, that when you isolate them and you have them freestanding. This new green park would become a part of a larger infrastructure idea, and would reconnect with other existing green areas, like this boulevard, the Yamaquique, with this central park of the Campo de San Francisco, so that in a way we would continue a kind of existing east-west promenade, walking promenade, that would cross the whole city, and that would cross our site, and that would end up in this university campus. Because actually part of the program of this new development would be to expand the university campus that was here located into this area. So in a way, what we are making is a campus, university campus, combined with housing, with office and public facilities. And the third target of, as I said, it was to recover this contact with nature. So nature in a very natural way, as a place to make celebrations, to make parties, like a social encounter. But at the same time, nature here, it's always like the background of the historical architecture in Asturias. So this is Santa Maria del Naranco, which is well, it's a Romanic masterpiece. It's really UNESCO World Heritage building. Is one of the most important churches in Spain, and this is kind of the archetype of relation between green grass surrounded by trees and the freestanding buildings in the center. And this is San Miguel del Lillo. So actually, this is just 5 kilometers away from our site. So we took this as a reference in order to define our strategy. We wanted to recreate this kind of condition of freestanding buildings standing in the grass. And then the fourth part is that this whole collection of things should create like a kind of innovation park. So where you can have university functions, where you can have research, where you can have startups. So kind of a Silicon Valley campus at the scale of Oviedo, where the Central Park would really reconnect all these different entities, like in the traditional idea of a campus, of the American campus, where you have all the universities related around the central lawn, like in Virginia's Thomas Jefferson campus. This is very relevant to have this kind of balance, this kind of campus typology of having a balance between green and architecture. And where green, the grass, it works out as a kind of foyer, an entrance to all the buildings. This is very interesting, this image, how you always see the facade of the buildings directly related with the central space. This is something that we wanted to bring, and so that all the new buildings that we would create, they would offer their facades towards the main public space, and at the same time that it would always be pedestrian and biking, so there would be no cars, always towards the park. So all the buildings would have all their let's say load and delivery car access in the back, so that you would liberate always the main facade towards the park. This is some diagrams of the layers that we thought about, how that could explain the project. So we have the central park with a boulevard. Then we call the jewels what we had these jewels that would be freestanding in the grass. The jewels, as I said, they were inspired by all this historical architecture on site. And then we would have this kind of Paseo de Ronda, which is this promenade that would surround the park, and that would be anchoring all the new buildings that will be built around it. So the whole campus is focused visually on this central space, and this would show us this would finally in a kind of master plan idea, which was the task of the competition, really, to have a master plan idea. But as I said, the landscape approach, it was determining for how to organize the city, and also to define like different identities along the side. So we had a kind of innovation campus in the area, this area, then a boulevard that was more related to the residential blocks, and some buildings on the borders that would make blending with the existing fabric. I'm gonna go a bit more quick around here. This is very important because in the end, you're creating beautiful facades, a beautiful relation between architecture and public space. And this, in the end, it ends up being you're increasing the value of the land, of the architecture, of the developments. So when you're working then later with developers, you need to provide good neighborhoods that would be kind of successful also economically. This is the surrounding route that it's not only to connect all the buildings, but it's also a biking lane and a running lane. So it's like a sport loop around. And I will go a bit more quickly through this. This is a bit how all the strategies, because actually this development, the idea is that it's going to be like a prototype of a sustainable neighborhood, like with zero carbon emissions, and what kind of strategies we have to implement this. So it's mainly fully walking and biking in the central core, and that all the traffic, it's, as I said, is on the outside perimeter with parking islands on the edges, and with an internal biking system with electrical biking. You see that yeah, this kind of promenade around the park, and the topography also, that it's really important because the whole topography is sloping down. Another important idea was that we wanted to recover the original topography of the site of these meadows. It is very soft grass, so we had to change. But when they built the hospital, it was all full of platforms, so we had to refill and modify the whole topography in order to make these soft transitions, soft topography, and at the same time to make it accessible for everyone, as you can see in this image. And then it was about giving new functions to all these buildings and putting them into value. So you will see that the buildings which are in the center, they are always like at the end of the perspectives to access. So the boulevard has as the end of the perspective this el edificio de la maternidad, the church that we also kept. So all the buildings, they are really like the icons of this new public space, and we are providing like transforming it into this is going to be a library with a cafe on top, and with urban farming and a roof terrace garden on the upper floor. This is the same building. So when you see how it's now integrated, it's totally surrounded by the park. There's no car access to it, and it's always pedestrian. Or this circular building that you saw at the previously, how it's now floating above this kind of new topography. Yeah, some other existing buildings. I'm gonna go a bit quicker. Park, it's like a running track, a sports area. So the lawn, the idea is to try to add only programs that you could do in the lawn, so that we don't fill the whole space with sport fields, but it's just purely things that you can do on the grass. So you can do an open air cinema, you can do yoga, you can do football, you can run, but don't do programs that would destroy this kind of pasture idea. This is the running track that goes around the park. As I said, the yoga meadows, or big spaces for events, for concerts, just for neighborhoods, associations, and parties. And at the same time, the boulevard, the part of the boulevard that's more residential, it provides like a ground floor activity for cafes, for restaurants, and without traffic. This is the the new police building that we had to relocate, the headquarters of the police. And in terms of landscape, the idea was to keep most of the existing trees as much as possible. So the design, it really absorbs the existing trees and adds another 800 new layers of trees. So we keep the existing forest and we add a new layer of trees. So actually we had to adapt the whole topography always to keep the existing trees. And also another strategy for sustainability, it was to use all the recycled materials from the demolition of the buildings that we're going to demolish to create, to rearrange this topography that we were talking before. So we use all the debris from the demolition to make hills and to cover and to create this new topography. And lastly, this idea of this ring, of this perimeter ring, it's also an energy ring because all the heating and the climate system of all the buildings, it's arranged around the central district heating system with a new building in the park that it's like giving energy, heat and to all the different buildings. And the last part of this strategy is this idea of a water creek. That what it is a kind of sustainable drainage system that recollects all the water from the park and also from the different buildings. So evacuates all the rainwater from the buildings into this creek, and it goes down where we have a very big water reservoir. That we reuse the water for irrigation of all the public spaces, and also to laminate it in order not to throw it so quickly into the sewage system of the city. So what we do is that we alleviate, say that we don't put more pressure into the sewage system of the city because we let's say we stop the constant flow of water into the network. Yeah, this is a scheme where you see the underground deposit. We also reuse it to create a kind of a line of water. This is very important thing when you design landscapes. So when you do things, you don't do them just for aesthetic pleasure or for visual interest, but you're trying to combine engineering strategies or sustainability strategies, like is the recycling of water. But at the end, if you design it in such a way that you create also a public space around it, you are providing a beautiful space, where a path where you have water running, you have a kind of education space for children without needing to create like a educational building. And it's giving a kind of identity to the whole park. So the whole park is crossed by this line. It's called the line of water path that ends up in this lake, which is like a water reservoir, which is a small plaza that works against climate change, but at the same time is like a fresh public space for the summer. And the good thing is, well, this competition, we won it 2017. Now we are we are finishing now all the urban planning documents. So it's a project that is going to be realized in the next years, and that we are finalizing the urban plan for the transformation of it. And the third project I wanted to show, it's a project that I did in the last 5 years for West State. So together I work, besides this project I've been showing you, I've been doing this project also for West State, among others. This the transformation of an island, a New Holland Island in St. Petersburg in Russia, which is really, this is a historical industrial area, very much near to the city center. If you know a bit of St. Petersburg, you know that this is the Hermitage Museum, the former Summer Palace. Today is the Hermitage. This is the Admiraltейский building, so the Marina headquarters. And here, this is one of the first buildings to be built in St. Petersburg, when the construction in the 18th century of the city done by Peter the Great. Peter the Great was the Tsar that created St. Petersburg in its name, of course, and it was a design that was he brought Dutch engineers from the Netherlands to help him build a city in the very swampy area, like it was Amsterdam, or it was like the Netherlands, where he had studied, when he was young. So I think I have a picture. Well, this is not, I don't know, this is not Peter the Great, but he was probably someone like that. So one of the first buildings that was built, or one of the first areas, it was this island, this triangle, surrounded by canals, and it was called New Holland Island because of the first workers that helped to build the city, and that it was a place that was from the beginning related to ship construction, to shipbuilding, because to create the army, the water army, of Peter the Great. So actually it was built in the middle of 18th century, and it had this, at the beginning, actually, it was composed by many beautiful brick buildings that its original purpose, it was to dry the wood to build the ships. So actually they had very high ceiling that they would be standing the wood from the top of this building in order to dry, because at that time they would take trunks from the trees, and very long, they would first need them to dry them before being able to use them for the ship construction. And they would have these amazing huge buildings with very high roofs, and with even some kind of classical facade or arcade that would shape the entrance to this whole complex. So the whole complex, it was like a fortress. It was designed with all the buildings on the perimeter, and with a kind of lake or a pond in the center, where they would test boats and ships. So this kind of fortress, this triangle, it remained closed for 2 centuries, or almost 3 centuries. And they built even much more buildings, and it was always related to the construction of boats, to the research on boats, construction. But in the 1950s, it was left empty, and it was kind of a ruin, abandoned and neglected for till in the year 2000, where there was the idea to renovate it. So this is the state in 2011. You can see that it was almost like a ruin, and that it was famous in St. Petersburg because you could access with all these water tours inside the lake, but you could not really step into it because it was all like it was like a kind of mystery island. You could see it from the lake, but you could never really step into it. The facade of this beautiful brick building was totally deteriorated because of the time, because of the salt of the water had been inside the bricks, and it was being degraded. and also because nature and spontaneous trees had grown and totally created like a fence around. This is just poplar trees, Populus alba, surrounding the island. So around 10 years ago, first developers, there was a private developer who asked Norman Foster to make a proposal to make an opera house here. It's a project that actually it was started to be built. They made the basement, but it never went more than the basement. And afterwards, there was new developer, the Millhouse property, who got the rights in order to renovate the island, and they organized like a competition through the Iris Foundation to select the architectural team that would give a new concept to create the island into a kind of cultural district, into a mixed-use cultural district. So they called all these architects, Chipperfield, OMA, it was MVRDV. So there was this competition till finally there was a winner team called Work AC, American office, who won the competition. But actually, this competition was also never realized because in it, the architects were proposing like to create very big transformations or modifications in the heritage buildings that were never accepted by the city of St. Petersburg. So we have to know that this is almost UNESCO heritage buildings. This is buildings from the 18th century. It's like the masterpiece of industrial architecture in St. Petersburg. And the city authorities, the heritage department, did not allow this project to proceed. And that's when New Holland Island, well, the Millhouse asked us as West State to continue and to start provide for a new master plan and a new landscape design for the island. So yeah, actually, this one here, I think it's me. This is Edso Biddels, director of West State, and this is Julia, the head of the development. So when we started working here, actually, the client, they had already been making a lot of transformation on the site, and they had already demolished all the buildings that were not historical. So only to keep the historical buildings. You see the condition of these buildings. This was around 6 years ago. They had quite a clever idea, which was to start to make a kind of temporary opening of the island for the people, a kind of place-making strategy in a very cheap way, just to install some containers, to make a bit of landscaping very simple, and to open up the space for the people. So they had this very nice idea of creating just demolishing everything and creating a flat lawn where people, for the first time, they were able to enter the island and to sit down in the grass and to have activities or just to lounge. You can imagine that this is no-brainer or what a silly thing. But in St. Petersburg, that it's a city where you can usually not touch the grass because it's always ornamental, it's always beautiful, and it's always surrounded by fences. Just the fact of being able to, this is the traditional image of beautiful St. Petersburg Park. Just the idea of being able to sit on the grass was a very challenging concept. So you always have to understand the location where you're working on. So it provided like a beautiful free no charge space for the young people, like a kind of a feeling of freedom. And then in Holland Island, so the developer, they had a very interesting idea of programming the space with full of activities, cultural activities, to activate the public space. Quality of the image is very bad, sorry. At the time, so all these ideas, they served us as a reference to start working on the master plan. When we started working on the master plan, all these things were already happening. And they gave us like the concept, looking at this, they help us define the concept of what should be the important thing of the transformation of the island. And it was really about creating a big green, like a very big lawn that would be like the core of this new development, and that would be as a kind of base or background for the existing buildings. So we took this concept of instead of making a big lawn. So originally they had only made a small lawn in this as a temporary park. So we extended this concept of making a huge lawn so that the whole area, the whole triangle that was empty without buildings, was a kind of central lawn protected by the buildings and also by a new tree promenade that we created in order to close the triangle and also in a way to restore the original design of the architect who envisioned the New Holland Island, that originally it was meant to be kind of a triangle, enclosed triangle. But we would be doing this by this alignment of trees and pavilions, with the ambition to create a multifunctional cluster or a hub where you could go shopping, you could go eating, working, living, so kind of mixed-use city. So it's the main, let's say that our main ambition was really to create a marriage. We call it a marriage between landscape and architecture, between the historical architecture that we were envisioning like a very respectful renovation of them, and creating a new landscape that would make it flourish and shine again. And with this new boulevard, that you would see that it would reconnect with St. Isaac's Cathedral and with the Hermitage, so that it would reconnect with the city center. So this island, it would not be anymore like an isolated island, but it would be reconnected with the city. You can see very clearly. So this was one of the first actions. We had to anchor again the island to the city by creating this allée of tilia cordata, of linden trees, where we would have all these pavilions under the shade of the trees. This kind of would surround the rest of the buildings, and we would create like this kind of promenade or loop of pedestrian loop that would open up all the ground floor of the buildings with new functions like shops, with restaurants, with cafes. And we provided also the guidelines about how the architectural renovation of all the interiors should be, because these buildings are really absolutely incredible in the brickwork. So we tried to keep it as much as original as it was, and to keep the beauty of the original structures. Actually, this is like the space of them. Remember, I explained you before how they were drying out the wood by hanging it in these spaces. So some of them, we kept them originally like this, to create like a gallery of arts or museums. But the main space, the most important thing, it was the central space, the lawn, where we continued with this idea of having a lawn, and the only action it was to create a very resistant lawn with good soil quality, with sandy structure, and then to provide movable furniture so that it could be changing constantly and to accommodate for different events. And then to make a kind of calendar all year round of different activities that would happen along the whole year. Outdoor space. So these are some diagrams to try to demonstrate how the space could change when you use the lawn just for a football field, or you could make an event, a concert, or you could make an exhibition space. And also in winter, St. Petersburg has very strong seasonality, and the space could be transformed into ice skating. This is the Ivana Kupala, which is 24th of June. We were Silvia, one of them, in the fire, if you remember well. And there was this some more romantic areas, more small gardens. This is like a herbs garden we designed in front of this restaurant, this new restaurant. So the idea of this herbs garden is that all the species could be related to gastronomy and would be herbs for cooking. So you have the feeling that you're eating in this terrace, kind of organic food, and that you are taking directly all the herbs that you need directly from your garden. With this very curvy design. And this I already showed. And there are some other special areas. This courtyard. This was the former jailhouse, like for prisoners. That was open up. That the courtyard was open as a paved space for cafes and also for concerts. And another main space of the intervention was the renovation of the lake, of the pond. So we wanted to keep like the original use of the pond, that it was a place for floating boats or for research onto boat construction. So we created all the system of floating boats, floating pontoons that could be used for a cafe or just to have a swimming pool, and also like a long tribune as steps walking towards the water. We added also some bridges on the perimeter in order to have a kind of circular route around the water. And again, we said that this pond should be kind of multifunctional use, so it should be constantly programmed all year round. You can even have an opera a floating opera, and that the stage of the opera of the people would be standing all around the opera. So again, we tested the different possibilities that could be arranged in this pond with these pontoons. By moving them, they are floating pontoons. You could have just like a regular marina, or you could have in summer a swimming pool. We could have a stage to make a outdoor cinema, or we could make a floating island, exhibitions, a beach, or to make a floating ice rink and hockey field. This is some images of this tribune, of this deck. Everything is done with wood, because we use the same system of construction the ships as if it was at that time, 300 years ago, and and also the idea that the pond in winter, and when it freezes, it could be transformed into an ice rink for people. You see here the last, let's say the topping to this project was the construction of this huge boat. It looks like one of the boats that was built at that time and it's an element that we introduced when we were asked to design a playground for the park. So we thought about recreating the origin of the island as a shipyard and research, and we decided to take one of the ships that was designed by Peter the Great, actually himself, when he was 18 years old in the Netherlands. He designed this boat called Peter and Pavel, and we researched on it. And actually, we just proposed to make a replica in wood in the park, but not to make it fully, but just to make the shell of it. So to make all the bones of the structure, the skeleton, as if it was like under construction. So in a way, we were trying to recover the memory to create the illusion of the place, of the island, but to create a playground out of it. So we worked in this with Richter, which is a German company that we usually work with them to create the playgrounds. And we work on the models, maquettes, about how to create this huge boat. How could it work as a playground? So we worked on creating this shell. These are design models about making this wooden shell together with this scaffolding structure that that was like the scaffolding that were used for the ship construction. And this scaffolding would be then filled with strings, with ropes, with slides. So, of course, this boat first looks like a Viking boat. So then we really researched very deeply on how to really build the real boat, going into historical drawings, talking with companies, and we made our first 3D model about how with the real dimensions of the boat. This boat, we kept the shell, and we recreated the original levels of the boat, both with nets, with all this kind of collection of plain elements for the kids to enter from the bottom and to be able to climb till the captain's cabinet that would be here on the top. And also the scaffolding itself, it was like a piece of plain element. So it was full of slides, strings. So the whole shape, the whole construction, it doesn't look like a playground. So it's kind of an art piece, like an object sculpture, but it has this double function of being also a playground. This is a plan of the playground and some images from Richter about how it was inserted. This is the strings about how we would build it with the materials, the protection materials, and its location in the park. Next to this Harvest Garden that we saw. Yeah, so the interior with the different levels, which are really and of course for building it, we didn't really know how to build it. Actually, nobody really knew how to build it. So we contacted a company, a shipyard company. We went to the shipyards and we contacted a company who actually they were building a similar boat, but even bigger than the one that we wanted to build. This was a huge, also historical boat, and they were building it exactly with the same traditional techniques from the 18th century. So we asked them if they could help us build our boat. They really had the experience. So they helped us to create all the construction documents and to make a first prototype of one of these skeleton. One of the first part. This is the first one that we built, and a bit of the construction process of how we were building one by one, starting from the back side and just adding different levels. The park, it was opened 2016 with the first phase. This is an interesting project because it's not finished yet. So every 2 years, one building is getting renovated. Last year, this building number 12 was renovated. 2016, the commandant house was renovated. The jailhouse was renovated. So part of the island was open to the public, but some other it was still remains closed. So this is a project that we are keep on doing and building. And now I will show you like just images from the first years. This is 2016, how when it was opened, first part renovated. These are images of this linden trees, this Tilia Allée, with this park and with these paths, narrow paths in the grass. This idea of just creating a lawn with pavilions, with tents, integrating part of the existing trees. Well, these are all new trees that we planted, all these Tilia cordata trees. All these trees, they came from Germany because of the size. They are large size trees that had to come from Germany because there are no nurseries in Russia that could provide this kind of trees. And this is the existing apple trees and pear trees inside. Also brought this Quercus robur. These are Antugra. These are oak trees. And also part of the project was working with architects, Ludi architects, who designed these pavilions in the grass as a stage for events. You see all the furniture for temporary furniture to occupy the lawn, and the recovery of the path around the pond with this pavement made with granite pebbles, kind of simulating a historical walk route. Yeah, this was picture from the first year. This is fully crowded every weekend. It's one of the most successful areas of St. Petersburg. Always crowded. Sometimes even maybe too much. This was like the first weekend. It was really crowded. The garden, people walking through, and you see actually the ship. This looks very similar to one of the renderings that we saw. Actually, it's almost like one of the renderings, and the herbs garden. You saw the floor plan before with all this shape design. The boat with the scaffolding, all into this continuous. And here the boat even has these canyons and scaffolding with the slides. You see that the pond it serves as every year this artist makes an installation in the pond, so you can see it always walking around the pond. The boat, it's super crowded. They need to put a control point because they need to limit the children playing inside it. And they make also theaters in the boat, with as if it was a pirates conquering, attacking the boat. And this for the basin, they are at the moment they have not built yet this tribune that we had in the project. They are building like some floating structures. Some years ago they made like a beach in the middle of the pond of the basin, with these umbrellas and hammocks, and this art piece as a lily pond, water lilies, sorry, and the stage where they make concerts every weekend. There's a very strong cultural programming with concerts at night, during the day and at night. So it's kind of a festival park in a way. So it's hyper programmed. But the important thing is that we always have this kind of carpet of grass that gives a kind of coherency to the whole thing. Yeah, this was some fireworks from the opening, the day of the opening. And every year, as I said, they are making new artist installations. This was some years ago. This artist from New York, Kinetic, I think they were called. They made this installation, which is this Firebird. So it's like a pavo real, like the feathers of this bird, that it was floating on top of the park. It's a beautiful installation. So it's totally surrounding the whole basin, and it was kind of floating cloud on top of it. And it's very funny because this is really very popular. So everyone in St. Petersburg, this is like some excerpts from Instagram. So this is everyone wants to make a selfie in the island. Selfie in Russia is something very important, as you can see. A lot of posing, especially all the girls. Yeah, and I think I'm kind of finished. And I think I have some extra images, yeah, from the last years. This renovation of the jailhouse. We made like a freestanding building surrounded by grass. The center of the courtyard, they also use it for concerts and cafes. So the whole ground floor of the building is a street market with different bars, and that they are all open to the center where there's concerts and yeah, ballet. It's very interesting cultural programming. In winter, they put a Christmas tree in the middle. They make a Christmas market, and you see that in winter they have also this ice rink in the lawn. So actually, we are trying to make the ice rink in the water, but the ice is not as strong enough for supporting with safety of the people. So for the moment, they are always making the ice rink every winter. They make a ice rink in the lawn. This is part of the building that was renovated last year with a cafe, and where we made this alley, this garden walk, we call it, which is an alley of different trees with flowering. You have apple trees and amelanchia with these very sculptural shapes. So to create a kind of calm space in the park, because everything is always very crowded. So we wanted to create this very calm path. You have just to be able to sit down and escape a bit from crowd. This is part of what was built last year, and I think this is the end. So this is what I was trying to show. This the whole project is a master plan project renovation, but it started all from a kind of landscape point of view, landscape perspective, and also by the idea that sometimes the most simple thing, as just making a flat grass surface and beautiful trees and paths, it helps bring in the quality of the historical heritage, more than sometimes making very extreme radical architecture interventions like it was in that competition that I showed you from work AC, OMA, all this. So this kind of respectful approach for this kind of site, it was very much appreciated, and it's a very successful park that in a way it blends the tradition of St. Petersburg and a more contemporary approach towards the sun. Yeah, this is one of the entrances and the exits, and that I wanted to finish with this image. My God, I talk a lot. Yeah, Silvia, I think I'm there. I'm finished.
Okay, Juan. Well, thank you very much. It was really, I think, very inspiring for us and for the students. Also because in the series of lectures we had, this is the one that takes in charge the city. So it has the scale of the city. And then it helps to understand that landscape can really structure a small garden as well as a big city. What I found really interesting is that in your strategies that you were telling us, very often the landscape keeps history together. So it's also very interesting that just changing, you change the perception and as you said, the perspective towards a historical building, a historical fabric, just not touching it, but just touching and changing and working on the context, so on the landscape around it. So this, I think, is very powerful. And also putting all the green in a network, so connecting in a green net all the open spaces and the public spaces in the city, changes the perspective you perceive the city itself. I'm talking about the historical buildings. So this would bring me to the first question to you, which is, do you think that this can work and should work also in the contemporary city? So can we structure our new cities, expanding cities, starting from the open space, from the public space, and how the municipalities see and accept this? So, of course, they cannot see money immediately, but are we going towards this direction?
Yeah. Well, I think the contemporary city, it has to be done like that. I mean, I think there's no other way. I mean, or at least always in the designs that we do, that I've done, and also at West State that we do, we always start the design from the public space and from the green, but not the green. I mean, it's public space because this is really the element that really structures the city. And that's what it anchors all the different elements. It anchors the city with the territory. This is very relevant to really make people understand where do they live, what is the relation of the city with their natural context, with the territory, with the hinterland that it's behind. So only by creating longer connections, by longer corridors, by longer networks, we cannot do that with buildings, but we have to make it with the public space, with empty space, with the green infrastructures. So I think it's something that, in a way, it was done. It started in the 19th century. So the creation of the public space, it's an invention of 19th century in the European city. But usually in the 19th century, they started first they started by demolishing. So when in Paris or in other European cities, they started opening up boulevards. They were really creating longer spaces, bigger spaces that would structure the city in a better way, and that would start to connect things that were not connected because it was so dense and that it needed connections. But this idea of creating green infrastructure is an idea from the 19th century, that today it's the way that I would say that urban design is it's heading. I mean, it's what we are doing, and the notion of green infrastructure, it's the notion of how cities are now being transformed, the notion that the city is not separated from its territory. That is a notion. So everything that we do on the edges, we are now constantly, when we make expansions of the city, we are always working with the notion of edge. So we cannot make something that it's isolated from the context. We have to always look for the traces or the connections. So something which is very important is, first thing, that we have to really know very well the site where we work. We really have to look carefully on the conditions, on the water conditions, on the creeks, on the old paths that were there before, on the historical relations that once were established and maybe they were lost because they built a highway that cuts the whole network. I mean, and that's why we always start analyzing the historical plan drawings. What were the original traces? What were the water lines? What was all the traces that we can grasp? What was the pieces of native forest? And what you always have to try to do is to take all this and try to put it back together, because you cannot start a project from scratch. You cannot just roll like a carpet and forget about everything. Even if you cannot just make a public space out of nothing. So you always have to try to make very good analysis of the site, see what is positive, bring all the things that have been damaged by human expansion, and to try to reconnect them into a longer unit. So yeah, territory. I mean, here in some of these projects, we are working enclosed enclaves, but we are always trying to expand it and reconnect with something else, because it's the way that what you do here, it really has an interaction with a longer scale. So in Oviedo, we really created this idea of this east-west axis. Nobody had talked about that before. So, and the whole design of this public space, it was not just like an isolated central park, but it was kind of expanded in that boulevard to reconnect with the rest of the city. So we have to be constantly looking outside of our boundary of intervention. We have to establish longer connections, and to find the inspiration in the local design. So this looks, I would say, like a St. Petersburg park, or that's what we try to do. It's quite classical, but at the same time it's contemporary. The one of Oviedo tries to recreate the natural landscape of around the city. So it's very important that we do, if you work in Rome, you would do it, or in Italy, I mean, you would do it totally different. You have different context. And that's what's the important thing, to focus on the context.
Yeah, actually, this is interesting because the guys are working on the parallel workshop or atelier exactly in Rome, next to Maxi Museum. They have site, and then they're working over there. So it's
the Flaminio.
interesting.
In the Flaminio project, a project of Flaminio, they were
taking out.
Yeah.
And talking about borders. Okay, the mixer didn't work. Talking about borders, you also mentioned the connection between inside and outside. So there's not anymore really a boundary between the inside of a building and the outside of a building, like a public space comes into the building and the way around somehow, because it's also, I mean, we come from a period of star architects. You just said that they were just building the object of architecture and then putting down, dropping down somewhere in the city. But finally, we find out it doesn't really work. We need really to connect the inside of building to the public space outside of it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what comes out from your drawing, your design also.
Yeah, ground floor. I mean, ground floor of a building is the most important plan of a design. No? How you make a building that should have a clear facade that is really addressing somewhere, so you really understand that this is a building. I know where the entrance is. I know where the entrance. I can orientate myself. I know where's the door. This door, it creates a kind of circulation of people entering, exiting the ground floor. We try to create always functions in the ground floor so that it keeps the sidewalk or the public space in front active, so that it's a constant interchange between the inside and the outside. So it's not so much that we make of course there's a relation in the design about the inside and the outside, but it's also not that the space on the outside, the public space, gets inside, but it's just that when you do architecture, you really have to think on how can you benefit with your design the street. I think this is a relevant, crucial question that each student should have. I mean, when they do a building, how can my building improve the quality of the city? Just if you're just doing a housing block, or if you're doing a museum. So any kind of program should have a kind of reflection on how can I benefit the street, the city, because we have a kind of moral responsibility. I mean, we are responsible of the city that we do. So it's very important. So it has not to be something that it's only to be seen from the outside and make a photography, but it has to do something that really makes that the sidewalk is active, that the people like it, that there's a economical boom around it, and that it brings economy activity to the neighborhood because it's successful. So we have a responsibility for that.
Okay, well, thank you. By the way, you also reloaded your title, I noticed, because
yes,
I went out with the poster and then today you showed us a different one. Anyway, it's okay for us.
No, I sent you.
I would ask the students if they have any questions. That would be nice to keep Juan with us for a few more minutes. Megan, I see you. You have a question. No.
You said that you had obliged them to prepare a question. You said that they were obliged to prepare a question.
A casa. In the meantime, Juan, I tell you that I registered your lecture.
Yeah.
So if you allow us, we can put it in the YouTube channel of the university, or we keep it for us. So you tell me what you prefer. You can tell me later.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are not questions,
okay, it was
Juan,
all very clear.
Thank you very much for being with us. I will ask them during the exams about your lecture. So
yes, let's see if they were not sleeping.
I see if they were present or not. And well, we keep in touch. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Silvia. Good luck with the course.
Thank you.
Ok.
See you.
Bye. Ciao. Ciao.
Va bene. Ok, andiamo avanti con le revisioni per chi deve. Anche da casa fatevi sentire.